We're trying to solve for two problems at the same time. First, in order to meet our energy transition goals, we're going to need vastly increased volumes of cobalt, lithium, nickel, zinc, copper, rare earths. But second, we need to make sure that as we expand our access to energy minerals, we don't do so in a way that undermines our energy security by deepening dependence on one country, China, which dominates the vast majority of processing and extraction. And in that regard, very, very supportive of the investments that countries like Saudi Arabia are making to deepen the supply, but also the diversification of these energy mineral chains.
Interesting. I would also like to get your thoughts on, the overall work over the last couple of 2 years, really, in terms of sanctions on Russia. We know that the overall Western position, including the United States, has been to try to hurt the revenues of Russia in terms of oil and gas. But ultimately, that doesn't seem to actually be taking place. How would you assess the overall 2 years in terms of trying to hurt Russia's economy on the energy front?
So our goal is clear. It is to reduce the revenues that the Kremlin has available to pursue this illegal and unjustified invasion of Ukraine. From that perspective, the policy is working. You can see, for instance, the steps that we've recently taken working with partners around the world against Gazprom Bank and the knock-on effect that that has had on the ruble exchange rate, which today is weaker than it's been at any time since March of 22, right after the start of the full-scale invasion. We're going to continue to tighten the screws against Russia's energy revenues, and we're going to do so jointly with partners around the world, including, importantly, here in the UK. In this regard, I would also put a positive spotlight on the UK government's recent moves to tighten the enforcement of sanctions against the Russian shadow fleet, which has been used to circumvent the measures that we put in place as part of our G7 price cap coalition.
I had the chance to look at some of the figures, and overall, we have seen a slight drop in terms of revenues for Russia coming from oil, coming from gas. But we have seen other parts of the world, for instance, China, buying more of Russian energy. So are you, in the grand scheme of things, do you have to rethink the strategy here? Because ultimately, it's not having that significant dent that you've claimed that you would like to achieve.
No, we believe it is having an effect, and you can see it. Putin has militarized the entire Russian economy, but you can see in the exchange rates, you can see in the losses that Gazprom is now being forced to report. You can see it in Russia's loss of its European market for Russian gas, that this has been a huge strategic defeat for the Kremlin. It takes time for these sanctions to bite, but we're beginning to see the effect there, and we are committed to maintaining the pressure, continuing to tighten the screws in order to create the incentive structure for Russia to negotiate in good faith, but also to reduce the resources which the Kremlin uses to prosecute this war. We are going to continue to focus on enforcement, reinforcing our work across the price cap coalition, but also working to reduce our collective exposure to Russian energy supplies, because that is the source of the source of the Kremlin's political leverage, but it's also through that diversification is how we achieve our own energy security.
And one of your closest allies in this whole process has been the EU. Do you take issue with the fact that European nations, some European nations, not all, are still buying Russian gas?
So every country is in a slightly different situation. The United States was in a position of privilege because of the abundance of our domestic oil and gas industry. Europe has achieved dramatic progress in terms of reducing its exposure to Russian fossil fuels, and we strongly support the commitment that the EU has made, which President von der Leyen has reaffirmed, to the full decoupling of Europe from Russian energy supplies by 2027. That's going to require continued progress now, especially on issues of Russian LNG. But these are topics where there's a high degree of convergence between the United States, between Washington and Brussels, and an area where we're confident that there is a consensus across the transatlantic community. And I think that consensus is going to continue through the political transition in the United States, as reflected in the first phone call between President-elect Trump and President von der Leyen.
Now, we are currently witnessing the end of an important political mandate in the United States. A new president is going to take over in the new year. What I would like to understand here is, what is your message to the incoming administration in case they consider rolling back some of these measures that you've actually been working on?
So I have seen no suggestion that people around President Trump and his incoming administration are looking at the weakening of our sanctions regime. To the contrary, people like Senator Rubio, nominee for Secretary of State, have been strong voices in support of an even tightened sanctions regime against Russia. My message, as I hand off to the new administration, is to emphasize the centrality of energy security as part of the United States' overall national security strategy, and the progress that we are making today, both in terms of our traditional energy sector, where the United States is producing more oil and gas than we ever have before, 13.5 million barrels a day, more than Iraq and Saudi Arabia combined. But we are also leading the way in the energy transition, expanding wind, solar, renewables, clean hydrogen, battery storage, industries that represent a huge opportunity for job creation and economic prosperity in the United States in the future. So I feel very good about where we are on these issues.
Well, let's see what's going to happen. Not long now until we have a new administration in place. But in the meantime, we appreciate your time this morning.